Alright, so we've got our bassoon here fully put together, and like any good anatomy class, we're going to dissect it to figure out what the parts are. I'm going to start right up at the very, very top. One of the last pieces that we put on when we're putting the bassoon together is the bell. And so generally I'm going to protect the bridge key by putting my thumb over this pad and giving it a little bit of a twist and an upward lift. And there it goes. Pretty simple. That's the bell. Next, I'm going to make sure that my two center joints are not locked together. So I have the long joint and the tenor joint, or the wing joint, and I'll show you those in a moment. But first I want to show you the joint lock pin. Joint lock pin, which is right here, and I generally am going to pull that straight out. That allows me to move them separately, but it keeps it nice and sturdy and together when it's all put together. So I'm going to work on taking out the long joint. And it's the longer of the two, which is a great way to remember that. So this is the piece that has two corks, and the longest piece that goes up and attaches to the bell. Next, we're going to look at the wing joint, or the tenor joint. You can tell with the wing joint, you can tell which one the wing joint is because it's got this big concave cutout in the middle so that the long joint will fit inside. And it has just one cork on one end. The other end has this pad right here, which later you'll learn about. It's called the whisper pad for the whisper key. And we need to be real careful that we're not damaging that as we're putting the bassoon together or taking it apart. But this is where our bocal is going to go so that we can blow into the instrument. Finally, we have the very bottom here, which is called the boot joint. And the boot joint has the two holes in the top. The smaller hole is for the wing joint, and the larger hole is for the long joint. It also has, some people don't know about this metal piece down here is called the boot cap, and it comes right off. It's just here to protect the U-tube down here, okay? The other pieces of the bassoon I want to talk to you about are the bocal and the reed, which right here are together. On the reed, we have the lay of the reed, which is the shaved part out here and flat part. And then we have the entire back part of the reed, which is called the tube, and has some other pieces on it, like wire and thread. The bocal itself, sometimes called a crick, is this piece right here. And it has its own cork for inserting into the wing joint. Two other pieces of equipment you should know about. One is the crutch. This piece goes into the side of the bassoon and can be used as a hand rest, but depending on your hand size or the hand size of the student, it may or may not be used at all. And finally, I have a seat strap here, and this isn't probably the best one. You can get them online all over the place, but there are two different types. So this is the hooking type, and it's got just a hook piece right here on the end, and that's for going through the hole in the bottom of the boot cap. So there's actually two holes, and generally you're going to go through the one that's closer to you. So this hooks right in there. And you'll see this all together. The other style of seat strap is called the bucket style, and that's where the entire bottom of the boot is held in a bucket at the end of the strap. And those work fine, but the hook type works as well. And so I'm going to be sitting on this, and it's going to bear the weight of the bassoon for me. So that's about all you need to know about the pieces of the bassoon. Okay, let's figure out how to put this guy together. So you're going to want to make sure that the reed gets put into some water before you begin, just to make sure the student is ready to play once they get to the fully assembled bassoon. So I'm going to just drop my reed in a cup of water, and I'm going to get started with the boot joint. The boot joint has this big silver tip on the end, and it has the two holes in the top. There's a smaller hole for the wing joint or the tenor joint, and the big hole for the long joint. So I'm going to grab the wing joint here. The concave cutout here for the long joint runs all the way down this side. That's going to point toward the center of the boot joint. So I get it with the small hole on the right, and that concave section is pointing straight in the middle. Pushing down and a little bit of twisting is a good idea, especially for the long joint next, which has to be put in while this wing joint is already assembled. So that piece is ready to go. and I take out the long joint. Now sometimes because of all the metal on here, it's hard to figure out which way it goes. So you can look for the joint lock pin and make sure that it matches up with the piece on the tenor joint where that pin goes in. So right here at the top, I've got a piece of metal that links the two joints together. So I see that I've got my pin up here, and that goes in this hole here. And I've got most of the metal facing me in the way that I've gone about assembling here. So they should fit in and nest in right next to each other. As long as there's not metal smashing in the middle, it's going to be fine. And this one too, downward motion with a little bit of twist. Students should be real careful, especially with some of these really long rods on the long joint and the metal all over the place. As long as they're not squeezing really hard on long pieces of metal, they should be just fine getting the bassoon put together. So now I'm going to go ahead and put down the joint lock pin. And now most of the bassoon is put together. The last piece is just the bell, which is real easy. I'm going to get my thumb on here and protect this bridge key between the bell and the long joint. Again, pushing down with a little bit of twisting. Now there are also bridge keys to pay attention to down here. This is where the tenor joint connects to the wing joint connects to the boot joint. So this right here, make sure that that's not getting smashed when they come together. And then the next step is going to be to put in the bocal. Now, if the student puts the bassoon together, it really helps for them to have somewhere to set the case like this, in a chair or in a corner of the room if they have to. Trying to get this done in the instrument room if it's real crowded is probably not the best bet. So make sure your bassoonist knows where they can assemble the bassoon in the room. But what they're going to want to do is protect the bocal and the reed as much as possible if they have to move around. The total best scenario is to put the bassoon together in place. So if this is my seat in band, this is where I'm actually getting my bassoon together. But some band rooms don't have a size to accommodate that. So if they're going to have to move around with their bassoon whenever, a great way to protect the bocal, which is kind of expensive to replace, is to just put it in the top of the bassoon. So right here in the bell, I can just drop in my bocal. And you'll see a lot of bassoonists walking around with the bocal up there. It's just up and out of the way. Obviously, they need to make sure that they're not tipping it out and it's dropping. But it's going to keep it protected and keep it out of the way until the student's ready to play. Then when they are ready, bocal comes out, and we go straight into the wing joint. Now, it needs to go all the way down into the bocal well. And what you're wanting to look for is the nib on here, the small vent. That needs to avoid jamming into this key right here. This is, again, the whisper pad, or the pad for the whisper key. So we need to make sure that that's not going to jam in there. Just keep an eye on it and make sure that that pad is going to seal once it starts to operate. And we're handling the bocal by the crook here. This is nice and strong. This is probably the most delicate place. It's not meant, it can easily get smashed this way. So we're going to want to hang on to the crook of the crook, or the crook of the bocal up here, to make sure that we're handling it at its strongest point. So once our bocal's in, we really just need the reed and the seat strap. So for the reed, one way to manage that in class to make sure it's not going to break is to just take the reed out and carry it in your mouth. And with the bocal in the top or with the reed in the mouth, there's a lot less chance of causing a bunch of expensive damage right off the bat. So as far as the seat strap goes, I have to move my case here, and I'll show you how I lay that out. So I've got my seat strap ready to go here, and I'm going to go ahead and lay it across with the hook end on the right side of the chair where I'm going to need it, and I'm going to lay it diagonally across the chair, and so that way it's coming up here to the front edge of the chair where I really need it. You can just lay it straight across, and some bassoon players prefer that. Just to make sure that there's less slippage, I like to have more of the strap under my legs. So I've got it laid across the chair here, and now I just pick up the bassoon. 2 hands is great. You can even do it with 1. As long as, again, you're not squeezing or pulling down hard on a really, really long metal rod, you're probably going to be fine. So with the bassoon here and the bocal pointing toward me, I just take a seat and I lift the hook and put it right in the closest hole. Now, this side is where I hooked it in. You don't want to hook the seat strap into the far side of the bassoon because then it's going to want to twist a lot more than it should. So I've got the hook in the close hole at the bottom of my boot joint. And now I proceed to adjust. So if I had my reed, I'd get that on and make sure that I was ready to go. And the last step that is connected with assembly is disassembly. So make sure you know how to take it apart. Go in the order that you saw in the anatomy of the bassoon video. But a big thing to teach your student is how to put the bassoon back in the case. There's a lot of variation in bassoon case manufacturing, and it can be a little tricky to figure out what goes where. It's kind of a nice little puzzle. Teach it to them that way, but look for cues and little slots, and especially pay attention to the way the bassoon is in the case before you take it out, assuming that it's in there correctly. So making sure you know how to put the whole thing together. You might want to practice a couple times and practice getting it back into the case before you teach your first lesson. Hey, another note about helping students prepare to play. Bassoon reeds are fully soaked in water. So I've got a cup right here, but a full container with a lid is a great solution because it's going to keep all the water and the bassoon in there. But for all double reeds, it's really important that they're actually submerged in water and not just in the student's mouth. So because it is a double reed, there are 4 surfaces that need to be soaked. Okay, so there's the outside, but then the inside of each reed needs to be soaked as well. So getting it basically full of water for a bassoon reed is going to help it soak correctly. And water is not as acidic as saliva. So over time, you can start to break down a reed much faster than it would break down just being soaked in water. And it's generally, for carrying the reed around, it's a great plan to put the reed in your mouth. But for getting it well soaked for performance and for class time, they need to make sure that they have a water source and a container of some kind so that they're not just putting the reed in their mouth for a few seconds. If the reed hasn't been played for a really long time, you can soak that reed for maybe 5 to 7 minutes to make sure it's kind of brought back to life. But if a student is playing their reeds regularly, just 2 to 3 minutes is totally acceptable to get a working reed. Then they're going to want to have their water container handy during rehearsal. These things dry out pretty actively, and if that reed starts to go dry, it's going to cause playing problems, and it's a lot more likely to develop some sort of a crack or a chip or something like that. So basically, even during rehearsal, bassoon players will sometimes need to take their reed off of the bassoon, and they can dip it in quick and put it in their mouth and just maintain some of that moisture without even flicking it all off. They can just leave whatever excess sits on there when they dip it and go right back to playing so that water has some time to soak in. That would be like a 3-measure rest and they're in a concert and they're really stressed out about their reed drying out. Otherwise, they can take a moment and just drop the reed back in there and let it soak a little bit. But it's a good idea to let them know they're probably going to need to re-dip or re-soak their reed a little bit during rehearsal and sometimes even during performance.